All right, let's just jump right into this because we're going to be digging into a really fascinating and honestly pretty counterintuitive idea today. What if our most basic human instinct to define things, to put them in a box so we can understand them, what if that very act becomes dangerous, even destructive, when we apply it to the biggest concepts out there? I mean, really think about that. We're wired to define. But the source material we're looking at today asks this exact question. And it suggests that for some topics, our number one tool for making sense of the world might actually be a trap, a way we accidentally shrink reality down to a size that we can comfortably manage. And this slide just lays it out so perfectly. On one hand, you've got the finite world, a titer, poison, a chair. Defining those things is literally a survival tool. It gives us clarity, it keeps us safe, it creates order. But what happens when we try to use that same tool on the infinite, on God, the divine, the absolute? Well, the argument is that definition stops being a tool and becomes a limitation. You're basically drawing a little chalk line around something that is, by its very nature, boundless. You've just put it in a conceptual cage. And that cage, well, that's where we get this powerful new way of thinking about an idol. Forget the golden statue for a second. An idol can be a concept, a mental object. It's an idea of God that's so specific, so rigid, that it ends up replacing the actual, wild, untamable reality. And here's the kicker. Because it's an object we've created, it's something that can be held, named, defended, and, of course, used. I just love this analogy from the source. It's so perfect. We think we're gazing at this vast, incredible cosmic reality, but we're actually just admiring our own little doodle of it. We end up interacting not with the real thing, but with our own drawing. And of course we do. Our drawing is safer, it's predictable, and it's completely under our control. So, okay, if defining is a trap, what's the way out? Well, it turns out ancient traditions developed this incredibly powerful intellectual technology to deal with this exact problem. It's often called negative theology, and don't let the name fool you. This isn't about being negative or pessimistic. It's about precision. It's about protection. Think about it like a sculptor. A sculptor doesn't create a statue by adding more and more clay. No, they take a block of stone and they chip away everything that isn't the statue. That's the whole idea here. Instead of trying to pile on words to say what God is, you carefully, precisely chip away everything that God is not. You're removing the false boundaries, not building new ones. And what's so critical to understand is that this isn't just some vague, wishy-washy, oh, words can't ever describe it kind of humility. No. The source calls it an ontological discipline. That means it's a structured, rigorous, logical process for thinking clearly about the fundamental nature of being itself. So how does this discipline actually work in practice? Well, it's basically a three-step process. First, you map out all the different ways things can exist in the universe. Then, using metaphysics, you identify the built-in limitations of each of those ways, like, for example, being made of parts or existing in time. And finally, you just systematically negate them. You exclude anything that is limited or dependent from your description of the ultimate absolute reality. So the thinking goes something like this. The absolute cannot be composite. It can't be made of parts. Why? Because anything made of parts is fundamentally dependent on those parts. It needs them to be what it is. That dependence is a limitation. So boom, we can confidently say it is not composite. Okay, next, same logic applies to time. The absolute can't be temporal. To exist in time means you're constantly changing. You're becoming something you weren't a second ago. That constant state of flux, that's another form of dependence, another limitation. So it has to be not temporal. And space? Same deal. It can't be spatial. Why? Because to have a physical location means you are here, which by definition means you are not there. That's a boundary. That is a finite box. So through this disciplined process, we can conclude it must be not spatial. And finally, it cannot be multiple, as in one of many, because being one of many would mean it's defined by how it's different from the others. You see the pattern? Each one of these not statements isn't just a random guess. It's a precise, logical cut, chipping away another piece of the stone. Okay, so this brings us to what might be the most provocative, the most mind-bending part of this whole idea. What if this ancient spiritual practice of smashing idols, of chipping away what is not God, is actually being carried out today by two fields we usually see as the total opposite of spirituality? Let's start with this big question.
When an atheist says, I don't believe in God, what are they actually doing? I mean, the conventional view is pretty simple, right? But the source we're digging into here offers a totally radical way of looking at it.
And here's the difference, side by side. We usually think of atheism as an absence, right? Like emptying a backpack of belief. It's a void. But if you look at it through the lens of negative theology, an atheist who rejects a specific, rigid, human-made definition of God is actually performing the essential first step of the discipline. They are smashing a conceptual idol. Now, to really wrap your head around that, the source suggests we have to redefine spirituality itself. Maybe spirituality isn't about what you believe. Maybe it's about expression. It's simply the way you outwardly communicate your fundamental orientation toward reality. So if you accept that definition, look what happens. The theist expresses their orientation through affirmation, I believe. The agnostic expresses theirs through suspension, I don't know. And the atheist expresses theirs through negation, I do not believe in that. All three are taking an active, communicative stance toward existence, and in that sense, they're all modes of spiritual expression. And this logic doesn't stop there. It extends to science too. By precisely defining the measurable, testable, finite world, everything that can fit into a model or an equation, science is constantly clarifying the boundary. Every new discovery actually sharpens our understanding of what the infinite, unbounded reality is not. It doesn't replace God, it just enlarges the field of what we can confidently say God isn't. So, where does this leave us? If we strip away all the definitions, if we just keep saying what God isn't, and we keep knocking down these idols, what's left at the end of the day? Are we just aiming for a big, empty void? Just nothing? Well, the source argues that's not the goal at all. The whole point of this discipline, the point of all these words, isn't to capture or seize the sacred. The point is to use language to get our own conceptual clutter, our own drawings on the window, out of the way. And I think this is the big fear for a lot of us, right? That if we let go of all our concepts, we'll just be left floating in an abyss of confusion. But the source makes this incredible promise about what's waiting on the other side of all that silence. What's left isn't confusion, it's contact, a direct, unmediated experience. You're no longer just reading a description of the ocean, you're actually in the water. The definitions, the idols, it turns out they were the very things keeping us separate. When they fall, the buffer between you and reality is just gone. So I'll leave you with this final question to chew on. If defining the sacred is what turns it into an object, an idol that we can control and use, then we have to ask ourselves, are the people who claim to speak with the most certainty about God really worshiping God? Or are they just worshiping their own cleverness, worshiping their own perfect, manageable, and maybe ultimately false description?